Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this last session of the day. Roll your own configuration profiles. My name is Matthew Mitchell, and I'm a Professional Services Engineer Level 2 here at Jamf. I started at Jamf in 2016 in the support department, and what I'm going to talk to you about today is one of the more frequent requests that I got in support regarding configuration profiles. Now, as you probably know, the way configuration profiles work today in Jamf Pro is that you create a single profile made up of one to several individual payloads. And some of those payloads have multiple sections within them. For example, security and privacy. If you want to just mess with File Vault, you're also deploying general, firewall, and privacy, and you're managing all of those things. A lot of people don't want to do this. Breakup multi-MDM payload GUI payloads, when I took this screenshot, had over 650 upvotes with some strong notes of agreement. 1 million times this. A feature request just to move firewall out of security and privacy has over 120 upvotes. And you may remember from the keynote this morning that we've started along this path of just enforcing what you want. We started that with Jamf Pro 10.13 with the iOS passcode payload. And in that feature request to break up multi-MDM payloads, there's an update from Jamf after we released 10.13 that said our next milestone will be to introduce this new configuration profile framework for computers. We'll again start with the passcode payload to build out the new schema and user experience. Once we have the new pattern established and validated for both mobile devices and computers, we will begin migrating configuration profiles over to this new tech. But that's then, and this is now. So let's take a look at what we can do now to achieve this functionality. Let's take a look at 3 goals I've got for this session. First, to learn a workflow to create custom configuration profiles that only enforce the settings that we want. Second, an increased understanding of how configuration profiles are structured. And third, experience signing and unsigning configuration profiles content deployed via Jamf Pro. Let's talk about the workflow. There's going to be 6 steps to that workflow. Number 1 is to create the profile. We'll make a new profile in Jamf Pro. Number 2 will be to download the profile, so we have a local copy of it. Third, we'll unsign the profile, which will then allow us to, step 4, modify the profile. After we've modified it, then we'll go ahead and sign it so that Jamf Pro doesn't mess with our changes. And then step 6 is to upload that profile back to Jamf Pro. Now, some of these steps are going to involve terminal commands. Don't worry about trying to scribble them down while I'm talking. I've got them all posted to this GitHub repo. I'll throw this up at the end of the presentation as well, but you can go to jamf.it/JNUC 2019-RYO or scan that QR code. It'll take you to the same place. I'll have every single terminal command that I am running during this session up there, as well as some examples of the profiles that I've created, and some bash functions to help you automate this process a little bit better. And again, I'll have this slide up at the end of the presentation as well. Let's talk about the why. In Jamf services, we always talk about the why. Why is this workflow valuable? Why is it helpful to know how configuration profiles are structured? Why should I care? Why is this important? Why am I spending the last session of day 1 with this guy? Well, I think in this case, the why is twofold. First off, to troubleshoot and mitigate issues. A while ago, I believe in the 9 series of our product, there was a product issue with the security and privacy payload where when you deployed that out, for some reason, it restricted your camera too. Extra bonus feature. Well, that wasn't great. To troubleshoot that, to figure out what was going on, we downloaded the profile, we unsigned it, we took a look at the XML, and sure enough, we were, for some reason, injecting some of the restriction payload into the security and privacy payload, so it was restricting the camera. So that was the troubleshooting side of things. The mitigation side was then we were just able to delete that XML out of the profile, save it, sign it, upload it again, and away we went. We sidestepped the issue. So that's one example. Another one, more recently, I was beta testing a new feature of the product, and when I deployed the profile out, I wasn't getting the expected functionality. The thing wasn't happening, so I wanted to know whether this was an issue with our product, which was in beta, or if it was an issue with the platform that we were targeting, which was also in beta. So I wasn't sure if we were sending it the wrong thing or it just didn't respect it. Well, downloaded the profile, unsigned it, looked at it, and we had a typo in our key. So, of course, that device was never going to figure out what we actually meant. So that was the troubleshooting side. On the mitigation side, I looked up what is this key actually supposed to be, edited it, saved it, signed it, uploaded it, and it worked great. So then I was able to go to development and say, not only is this broken, but here's exactly where it's broken, and here's what we need to do to fix it. So that was pretty helpful. The second why is what you want when you want. So the example I'm going to give you here is we're going to make a profile that will manage FileVault on its own. Now maybe we want to manage the firewall component in a different way. Maybe we've got some extra software to do that. Maybe we want our users to be able to go into the general tab of security and privacy and mess with whatever they'd like. Either way, we're just going to enforce FileVault. But we can also use this workflow to enable features to add them to configuration profiles either before Jamf officially supports it or Jamf has supported it and we just haven't updated that version yet. Either way, we're going to take a look at how to do that, and we'll do so with an example of voice control in the single app mode payload. That came out in Jamf Pro 10.16. I'm going to show you how to do the same thing on Jamf Pro 10.15.1. All right, well, let's start with our first example of just deploying out FileVault with security and privacy. We'll start our workflow on step 1, a good place to start. We'll start with the create step. All right, so we'll go into Jamf Pro then, and we'll create a new profile. So we'll go to Computers, Configuration Profiles, and New. Let's call it FileVault Settings. And then we'll go ahead and add the security and privacy payload. Now this part is very, very important. I'm going to configure the FileVault tab exactly as I'm going to want it to be deployed to my devices. After we're all done with this workflow, after I've signed it and re-uploaded it, I'm not going to be able to edit this anymore in Jamf Pro. So it's very important to set things up now according to how we want them later. Otherwise, on our modify step, not only are we going to be taking stuff out, but we're going to have to change what's already there, and that's not going to be great. So, not worried about the other tabs. I'm not worried about general, firewall, or privacy. We're just going to delete them anyway. So this all looks good. Let's go ahead and save it. After we save the profile, then at the very bottom there, we've got some new buttons available to us. One of them is download. So if we go ahead and click on download, then we'll get a local copy of this profile. And there we are. That's in our downloads folder, filevaultsettings.mobileconfig. So that's steps 1 and 2 complete already. We created the profile and we downloaded it. Let's look at step 3 then. The next step is to unsign. Now this is going to be our first foray into the command line with this workflow. And for some folks, that's an immediate nope. Don't want anything to do with the command line, but don't worry, you don't need to get creative with these. These are absolutely plug and play. Sometimes you'll just need to supply it a little bit of information with some prompts, but no big deal. Now, I don't want you to just walk away from this session with this great workflow tucked in your back pocket. I also want you to know what's happening at every single step and what all these commands are doing. So here's the command that we're going to run. Let's walk through it and make sure that we understand what it's doing so that no one's pulling any funny business. So this says security CMS-D-I path to profile.mobileconfig, piping that through to XML-int format and then redirecting that to path to output.mobileconfig. Okay, let's walk through that piece by piece. We're starting with the security binary. This interfaces with keychains and the security framework. CMS encodes or decodes CMS messages. In this case, that message is going to be the digital signature that we're trying to decode. Speaking of which, -D says to decode the message. -I is going to be the path to the input file, the path to our message. In this case, it'll be the profile that we're trying to unsign. Now that's actually the entirety of the unsigning process. The rest of this, after we pipe it through to XML-int, that's just formatting it as more human-readable XML. And then we're redirecting this to a new file that we'll create that has our formatted, unsigned profile inside of it. Okay, so that was kind of a lot. Why is all that necessary? Why do we have to do this? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at our profile. We'll go ahead and open this in text edit. And now there's a good bit of stuff in here, but at the very top, and then again at the very bottom, there's all this extra gibberish. And that's the signing signature on it that we need to remove. So what we're going to wind up doing here is editing some of this XML in here, but if we keep that gibberish in there, save and re-upload, Jamf is not going to like that. So we need to remove it. So we can go into terminal then and run our command, and that'll go ahead and create unsigned.mobileconfig on our desktop. Now we open this one up in TextEdit, and that looks much nicer. Now we can actually see what's going on, and we've removed that signature from it as well. So this then is the inside of a configuration profile, a bunch of key value pairs. Let's take a look at one of those. In the top block here, we've got this key of payload display name and a value of file vault settings. Well, that's what we called our configuration profile, so hey, we found where that setting lives. Off to the races. Okay, so that's step 3 complete then. We've unsigned the profile. Let's move on to step 4, modifying the profile. Now this is where we're going to do the majority of our work. This is where we have to match up what's configurable in Jamf Pro to the XML that's in front of us. We have to decide what stays and what goes. If we keep too much, then we're going to be managing extra settings. And if we keep too little, then the profile might not actually function as we are wanting it to. So there can be a little bit of trial and error, but I'm going to show you some resources that you can use to make some very good educated guesses. All right, so let's start this then. We'll go ahead and open that back up in a text editor. I'll just keep rocking with TextEdit. All right, so again, this is how our XML looks after we unsign it. But then back to keeping what we need and deleting what we don't, let's take a look at stuff that we should not mess with. So up at the very top of our profile here, we've got this line. This is the XML prologue. And then the line beneath it, this is the document type definition. Beneath that, we have the plist version. And then we've got this big blocks of text. Now this is where all of our configured settings are going to show up. Now this first block is this top portion, all the way down until the indentation changes here. Right there. Now technically this block doesn't completely close until we're at the very bottom of the file with that closing dict tag. But that's the top block, and then everything else inside of here is nested within that top block. With that top block and those other lines, don't mess with any of that stuff. Don't mess with the prologue, don't mess with the definition, don't mess with this top block. It's all just a bunch of XML needed for Jamf Pro and macOS or iOS to do their jobs. It's not enforcing any settings, so we'll go ahead and leave that alone. Let's talk about some stuff that we can mess with. At the end of the last part of this top block here, we have this key of payload content and a value that is an array. And it's an array of dictionaries. Each dictionary is defined inside of these dict tags. You can think of these as separate blocks of code. My advice is for any given entry, go ahead and ignore the top half and just look at the bottom half. The top half is going to be more miscellaneous XML for Jamf Pro and macOS or iOS to do their jobs, where the bottom half, that's where we're actually going to see where our individual settings show up. Now remember, we're trying to enforce just file vault settings, so we should be on the lookout for payload display names and settings that pertain to file vault. And a great way to match up what is what in terms of what we're configuring is to have Jamf Pro open right next to you to compare the XML to what's configurable in the GUI. All right, so let's take a look then at our first dictionary entry here. The payload type is com.apple.mcx. Well, that could be anything. So let's take a look at the bottom half then with our key value pairs, and we see two reasonable labels here: destroy FV key on standby and don't allow FDE disable. FDE means file vault disk encryption, so that's certainly relevant. Let's go ahead and use Jamf Pro to match up these keys to what settings they control. Let's think about destroying a file vault key. Now looking at this, I don't see anything specifically calling out destruction, destroying a key. But let's think about, what does destroy file vault key actually mean? Now those of you that have file vault configured in your organizations, you've probably seen when you start up your computer, you get that stark white screen and you have to put in your password or your recovery key. Your Mac is going to hold on to that until it should be destroyed, thrown out, whatever. What this setting is saying is that instead of destroying that key when you shut down your computer, we could destroy it on standby. Another word for standby in the Apple ecosystem would be hibernation. So therefore, we can probably match this up with require user to unlock File Vault 2 after hibernation. Now, this isn't a session on File Vault, but just an example of how you can use your knowledge about a particular feature, what's in Jamf Pro and what's in the XML to make a good educated guess as to what those individual settings do. Okay, so that all seems fine. Let's go ahead and keep that block. That all looks good. Let's go on to our next block. And here our payload type is com.apple.submit.diag.info. That doesn't sound like it has anything to do with File Vault. So let's take a look at the keys, and it looks like we've just got one auto submit set to true. Well, that kind of sounds like the privacy tab, submitting stuff to Apple. We don't want that. So let's go ahead and delete that. I'm going to start with this opening dict tag here and grab everything inside of it, including the closing dict tag, and delete it. Then we'll just go ahead and delete that extra spacing for formatting, and there's one less setting that we're managing without intending to. Awesome. Let's look at our next one, com.apple.application access. Doesn't sound like File Vault. The keys don't look like they have anything to do with File Vault, so we'll go ahead and delete that one too. And away it goes. Then we're on com.apple.security.firewall. Let's get that out of there. That's why we're doing this, right? So that we can manage firewall on its own. And it's deleted. Then we're at com.apple.mcx.filevault2. All right, that sounds super relevant. So let's go ahead and keep that block, but just so that we're not forcing any settings that we don't intend to be, let's make sure that we're taking a look at all those. So we've got enable set to on, that makes sense. We're trying to turn File Vault on. And then we've got defer set to true. Now, what might defer mean here? Well, if we jump back into File Vault, I'm not seeing anything specifically relating to deferral, but I do see this, that we can require File Vault to be enabled after the user logs out. Sounds kind of like deferral. We're deferring it for a later time. Makes some sense. That would probably be a reasonable assumption to make. But you know what happens when you assume. So let's go ahead and take a look and make sure that we know that that key matches up with that particular value. And we'll do this by looking at our second strategy for matching things up, Apple's device management documentation. Now, this is a huge piece of documentation, but it contains information on each type of payload, the keys for that payload, and what the keys do. So let's take a look at File Vaults, and we see under defer, right here at the top, if true, defers enabling File Vault until the designated user logs out. Okay, there we go. That's exactly what we thought it was doing. We're all set. So we'll leave that one in there. Let's look at some other options here. We've got use recovery key. Use recovery says, if true, creates a personal recovery key and displays it to the user. We definitely want that. User enters missing info. Here we are. If true, enables a prompt for missing username or password fields. We'll go ahead and leave that as the default of false so that we're not prompting our users for extra info. And then use keychain. This one is talking about using an institutional recovery key, which we're not doing with this workflow. So we'll just go ahead and leave that as the default false as well. So that whole block looks good. Next up then, we've got com.apple.screensaver. We'll go ahead and delete that. Then we've got com.apple.systempolicycontrol. We'll go ahead and delete that as well. com.apple.systempolicy.managed. Gone. Why is login window in here? Get that out of here. And then we're at com.apple.preference.security. Well, that seems vague. Let's take a look at what keys it's enforcing. Nothing. So this isn't doing anything for us. There's no freeloaders here. So let's go ahead and get rid of that as well. All right. Now we're on com.apple.security.fde recovery key escrow. All right. Now, this is how our recovery key is getting sent back to Jamf Pro. We can even see a little bit further down, we've got a key of location, and then a value, a string of this will be sent to the IT department. That's what we configured in our profile when we were originally setting it up. Then we're at com.apple.security.pkcs1, and the content of which, we've got this JSS File Vault Recovery Key Escrow certificate, and that content is the actual certificate being used to send that back to Jamf Pro. Don't mess with that. Definitely want that in there. If you mess with any of that, it's not going to end well. It'll probably end better than season 8 of Game of Thrones, but still not well. But that's it then. We've gone through this entire profile and we've taken out everything that's not related to File Vault. So we're all set here. Let's move on to our next step, re-signing the profile. Now, why do we need to re-sign the profile? If we upload this profile to Jamf Pro as is, Jamf Pro will absolutely accept it. However, Jamf Pro knows how a security and privacy payload is supposed to look, and this no longer looks like that. So it's going to try and re-add the XML that's necessary to make it a proper security and privacy profile, and this is one of those times where we really don't want that kind of help. So we're going to sign it to prevent Jamf Pro from messing with our stuff. Now, if you've got a signing certificate workflow in place already, go ahead and tune me out for a minute. If you don't have one, or you don't know what I'm talking about, we're going to go ahead and create one using Jamf Pro. First, we need to make a certificate signing request, or a CSR. Now, this isn't a certificate session either, so I'm not going to go really deep into what these commands are doing, but let's still go through it and make sure that no one's pulling any funny business, and we know what this command is roughly doing. So this is to create a CSR. We're going to use the OpenSSL binary, and then rec will be our verb. That's used for creating and processing certificate requests. Great, that's what we want to do. -out is going to be the output file that we're going to write to, so where our CSR should go after we create it, the desktop in this case. -new says to go ahead and create a new CSR. -new key says make a private key with that as well. RSA 2048 says make that private key a 2048-bit RSA key. -nodes is preventing the private key from being encrypted. And then -keyout is the path to where we're going to write that private key. Again, in this case, the desktop. Okay, so we can go ahead and give this command a run, and it's going to ask us for some information. Now, functionally, it does not matter what you type in here. And in fact, all you have to do is supply it something, and it's valid. So for example, we could give it a country name of US, and we're good. We can leave all the rest of the fields blank. Is that a best practice for anything? No. So my suggestion to you when you're setting this up in your own environment is fill all of this out up to and including the common name according to your organization's info and your Jamf Pro URL. But please note that just because you put a particular common name in here, that doesn't mean you can only upload this to that particular server. You can upload it to any server. So after we go ahead and give this a run, we'll get those files created. It creates a CSR and a private key, and then we can see them over there on our desktop. Let the video catch up with me here. Here we go. There they are, csr.csr and private key.key. I always like how macOS thinks that the private key.key is a keynote file. It's not. All right, so next then, we need to get the contents of that CSR file. Do this however you want, open it up in a text editor, whatever you want to do. I like this way a lot. I'm going to type in cat, and then drag in the file to terminal, and then I'm going to add the pipe character, which is right above the return key, and then type pb copy. So what this does is it prints out the file, but instead of showing me the contents, it puts it on my clipboard instead. So now I can go ahead and just paste this into... I can paste this right into my signing certificate program. In this case, we're going to use Jamf Pro for that and use the built-in CA. So I'll go to Settings, Global Management, PKI. Then we'll go to the Management Certificate template and create a certificate from CSR. We'll paste in the value of our CSR and then just delete that last empty line at the bottom here. And then change the drop-down to Web Server Certificate. And go ahead and click Create. So that's it. It then downloads that file, and we're all set. We've now got a certificate we can use to sign profiles. Now let's take a look at the command to sign profiles. This is the longer one. This is all one line, but it's just wrapped around the screen. So let's walk through this one. Still using the OpenSSL binary. This time we're going to use the smime verb, which encrypts, decrypts, signs, and verifies smime messages. We're going to use its signing power. -sign says to sign something using a supplied certificate. -signer
is the path to said supplied certificate. In this case, that file is going to be what we just downloaded from Jamf Pro. -in key is going to be the path to the private key, and that private key must match that certificate. So therefore, we must use the same private key that was generated when we made our CSR. -no detach says to use opaque signing. Again, not a certificate session. Don't worry what that means. It helps. -outform dir says to change the default output from smime to pkcs7. -in is the thing that we're going to sign, that unsigned mobile config on our desktop. And then -out is where we're going to put our newly signed copy of the profile. Now this command, while it looks a little daunting, this one is very much plug and play. All we need to do is move and rename a single file. And that's going to be this first file here. So that went to our downloads folder from Jamf Pro. And all we need to do is drag it to our desktop and rename it cert.pem, and away we go. The private key was initially created on our desktop when we ran the CSR command, so as long as we didn't move or rename it, we're good. And then when we ran our initial command to unsign the profile, that created unsigned.mobileconfig on our desktop. So again, as long as we haven't moved or renamed it, we're good. Okay, so that's our command. Let's take a look at it then. When we hit enter, we'll go ahead and get signed.mobileconfig on our desktop. And there we are, good to go. Now we're ready to proceed to step 6, which is uploading the profile. This step is an easy one. We just need to do 2 things. Our goal is to upload the profile back to Jamf Pro, but before we can do that, we actually have to delete our original. Why do we have to do that? Well, let's take a look back at our unsigned XML here. And we've got 2 keys, this payload UUID and payload identifier, and they both have the same value, that long string of letters and numbers. Per Jamf Pro, only one profile can have that particular UUID. So if I go with this original profile still existing and I try and upload this to Jamf Pro, grab that signed file on my desktop and upload, we're going to get an error. And that says unable to create object from file. That error can mean a bunch of stuff. In this case, though, it means we've got duplicate UUIDs. The fix here is just simply delete our old one, which is fine. It's managing a bunch of settings that we don't care about, so let's get it out of there anyways. And now that we've done that, we no longer have duplicate UUIDs, so when we try and upload that same profile that's signed, it'll go ahead and work just fine. Now remember, this is signed, so I can no longer edit it. And in fact, we've messed with it so much that it barely recognizes it as security, privacy, and profile at all. We don't even see that payload anymore. But that's fine. We signed it, so Jamf Pro hasn't messed with it. So we're OK to go ahead and scope it out to our devices. All right. That's the workflow. Now let's check our work and see the fruits of our labor. So after we deploy the profile and we let the computers encrypt, let's take a look at system preferences. So we'll open that up, go to Security and Privacy, and we'll unlock the panel. So we've got full access over everything in general. If we go to Privacy and then Analytics, we have full access to everything there. Firewall isn't being controlled at all. But if we go to File Vault, remember we're still unlocked. I can't turn it off. We're encrypted. It says recovery key got sent to Jamf Pro. And if we look at the inventory record in Jamf Pro, there we are. There's our individual recovery key. The process works. Hooray! All right, so there's our first example. Managing security and privacy and just using File Vault. So let's do our second example then. What you can take out of a profile, you can also put right back in. So I'm going to show you how to use absolutely any configuration profile setting that Apple has officially added. Maybe you're on a version of Jamf Pro prior to Jamf's official support of that feature. Or maybe Jamf Pro does not support that feature at all. In either case, you can do it yourself manually. So let's take a look at what we're going to accomplish here. We're going to lock an iPad into single app mode. We're going to enable voice control, and we're going to allow voice control to be toggled on or off. Now, both of those voice control features are part of iOS 13, And official support for them from Jamf came from in Jamf Pro 10.16. But let's look at how we can do the exact same thing on 10.15.1. All right, so we'll start our workflow over again on the create step. This time we'll go to devices, configuration profiles, new, and we'll make a new profile. Let's call this one SAM notes, single app mode notes. Scroll down and add our payload, and let's go ahead and lock ourselves into the notes app. Now, if this were Jamf Pro 10.16 or later, we'd see options in here for enabling voice control here and here. But this is 10.15.1, so they don't exist yet. Nothing else we need to do here. We'll go ahead and save that profile. And then we can download it. So there's steps 1 and 2 done. Next, we need to go ahead and unsign it. So we'll just rerun our command. We'll call the new file unsigned sam.mobileconfig so we don't overwrite our last one. And boom, there we go. Now, I kind of flew through that, and I did so intentionally to show you that once you know where you're heading with this workflow, it can actually go pretty quickly. And developing automation techniques is key to make that go even quicker. So on that GitHub page that I mentioned at the top of this presentation, I've got some examples of bash functions that you can throw in your bash profile to make this go much, much quicker. I've also got some directions on there for those of you on Catalina about how to keep using bash profiles with Z Shell. Okay, so let's dive back in here then. We'll open up our profile in text edit. Here's our XML. Now this time we're not looking to delete anything, we're just going to toss some new stuff in here. We've got 2 sections, one for options and one for allow user to change. So how should we figure out what to add in here? Well, we'll go ahead and actually use that device management document again to find the name of our keys. And as far as our values, it looks like this is all Boolean values. It's all trues and falses, which makes sense because the profile itself was just a bunch of checkboxes, right? Makes sense. So this one's false, false, false. Cool, so we just need to find the name of it. Well, we'll switch back over to the documentation and find single app mode's payload. It's actually called app lock. Once we click in there, we can go ahead and find the 3 objects that are inside that payload: .app, .options, and .user-enabled options. .app is talking about the app that we're locking ourselves into. .options is going to be what features are we forcing on. And then user-enabled options is what are we allowing the users to toggle on and off. Let's start with .options. And if we scroll through this, all the list of keys, we see voice controls is enable voice control. And it is a Boolean value like we thought. So to add this in here, in the options section of this profile, at the bottom, we'll go ahead and make a new line and type key, and then enable voice control. And we'll close that key tag. And then on the next line, we'll go ahead and put our value of true. So there we go. That'll force voice control on when we deploy this profile. How about user-enabled options? So we'll switch over to that object. And here it's just called voice control. And it's still a Boolean value. So switching back to our profile, we'll enter down a new line. And our key will be voice control. And then we'll close that tag. And we'll set it to true. There we go. Now we've gone and injected functionality back into a profile that's not available from Jamf Pro until 10.16, and we've just done this ourselves on 10.15.1. So we're done. We'll go ahead and save that profile. Then it's time to sign it again. So we'll just use the exact same certificate, private key, everything that we used on the last profile. We'll just point it at our newly unsigned profile, and we'll call this one signed_sam.mobileconfig, again, so we don't overwrite our last one. And there we go. It created the file. Now we just need to upload it. So we'll go back to Jamf Pro, and we'll delete our old one so that we don't run into that UUID conflict. And then we can go ahead and upload our brand new one. Now remember, this is Jamf Pro 10.15.1, and this feature didn't come out until 10.16. So if we go back to this, we're not going to magically see these options here now. However, since we signed our profile, we know that Jamf Pro hasn't messed with it, so we can go ahead and scope this out to our devices, and we should see our expected results. So let's deploy it and take a look at the iPad. We'll wait for that profile to come down. There we are, came down. Now take a look at the top here. There's a little tiny blue circle. that means voice control got turned on, so we're all good. I can go ahead and give it a command like show grid. There we go. Grid comes up on screen. We can give it some more voice commands or say hide grid, and then it goes away. If I triple click the home button on the iPad, then that blue circle goes away. Voice control is now off. So there we go. That was an example of deploying a configuration profile setting in Jamf Pro prior to official version support from Jamf. So the only thing we really need to watch out for here is iOS version compatibility. Now, voice control, like I said, is a feature of iOS 13. So if you deploy this to iOS 12, don't expect iOS 12 to magically have voice control. However, sometimes you need to be careful about what you're deploying incompatible profiles to. In this particular case, iOS 12 will ignore that key for voice control because it doesn't know what to do with it. In other cases, though, if you try and send a device a key that it's incompatible with, it might just ignore the entire profile. So as always, test, test, test before you deploy something out in production. If you run into something like that where it's not compatible with a particular version, just make a smart group with collecting those version numbers and exclude it. No big deal. All right, so to close up then, let's revisit our objectives. We learned the workflow for creating custom configuration profiles, and we saw 2 different examples of how to do that, both taking stuff out and putting it back in. Our second one was an increased understanding of how configuration profiles are structured, and we accomplished that by diving into the XML that makes up a configuration profile, and we also looked at the device management documentation for individual key value pairs. And then finally, experience signing and unsigning content deployed through Jamf Pro. We did this during steps 3 and 5 of the workflow. Once again, here's that URL for GitHub and the QR code. I've got all the terminal commands that I ran up there, copies of both of the profiles that I created during this session for reference, and then also those bash functions that I mentioned to help automate things. That's everything I've got. Thank you so very much for coming. Hope you had a good time. Hope you learned something. Thank you. And I don't know if we have much time for questions, but if there are any, I'd be happy to answer them. And you can also come out here too. Yeah, right here.
I just want to say thank you. You were like one of the best ones of the day.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very nice of you. Thank you. That means a lot. Yeah. I'm sorry, what? Overlapping settings?
Deploying overlapping settings is still the last profile that gets applied, the setting that gets...
It depends.
Okay.
It depends. In particular, so it can either be last applied or most restrictive. With the restrictions payload, it's usually most restrictive. But with the energy saver payload, it's the last applied. So there's actually a document from Apple out there about how that gets assigned out and then which payloads can be combined and which are exclusive. So maybe do a Google search for that, and I can try and find you a link for that too if you want to come up here afterwards. Yeah.
How about managing settings that are typically done pragmatically? So for example, CIS controls for password complexity, something that Apple out of the box, Jamf out of the box doesn't support. For example, mixed upper and lowercase characters.
Yeah.
You don't have a checkbox for that, so you do it through scripting. And that can cause problems with file vault desynchronization from the local user account.
Right.
If I can put that into a mobile config, I might be able to get around that issue. Is this something that you think would be possible?
So that's a really good question. This is entirely dependent on does Apple officially support it. It's more of like maybe Jamf doesn't support it, but as long as it's officially in Apple's configuration profile spec, then you can go ahead and inject it. So if they don't have a support for that, this won't work. But something you might be able to do there, if this is a plist that you're messing with, you might be able to just upload that to custom settings and deploy that through a configuration profile all the same. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're going for or not, but I think that's about as close as we could get there if there's no official support from Apple. Yeah.
So everybody, I think, has their own personal opinion. What's yours on the number of configuration profiles? Would you have them like for each individual setting or group them by, I'm thinking like Microsoft Office. You can set up configuration profiles for that. Would you create one for all your Office apps that's one big profile, or would you set them up based on the individual apps? Just as an example.
Yeah, so maybe in that particular use case of here's my stuff configuring Office, personally, yeah, I'd group that up. Where I tend to draw the line is certificates, passcodes, restrictions, and Wi-Fi. I like to keep those in their own separate profiles because if I ever have to mess with that, like for example, one of my earlier cases in support was we've got restrictions and Wi-Fi in one profile. I changed my restrictions, the profile lifted off, there's no Wi-Fi, and it doesn't come back down again. I believe that got fixed and it doesn't work that way anymore, but I'm paranoid enough about it that I don't want to do it again. So my personal vote is separate them where it makes sense, but if you've got here's all the configuration for one single app, that would make sense to me to just have all in one profile. Good question. Anything else in the back there?
What are best practices regarding the signing certificates? We have a team where we have a number of different people accessing Jamf. Should everyone create their own, or should we share one? Like, what are best practices for that?
Is being signed by an internal CA? Or how is the certificate being signed, rather?
Like for signing the config profiles.
Yeah, like doing that same workflow that I just did?
Yes.
You can go ahead and use the same one.
Okay.
If you're using the Jamf Pro built-in CA to sign it like I just did, it's not going to matter if everyone creates their own one. If you're doing your own thing, if you're having it signed by GoDaddy, DigiCert, or your own internal thing, maybe for cost, keep your signing certificates down, but no, functionally it doesn't matter. Yeah?
What's the timestamp on when you sign in the certificate because you uploaded it? When does it actually run out? You sign it. Say, has it got a 1 year lifespan?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. What happens every year? You have to keep doing the same thing. Resigning it. Does it automatically sign itself, or is it not? So I think there's a.
That's an interesting question. Yeah. I would hazard a guess to say you might have to re-sign it. With this particular, the way that I signed it, that was signed by the Jamf Pro built-in CA, which I believe expires every 5 years. The actual built-in root. So as long as that's good, I would think that it might be okay, but the certificate that I use to sign it does expire every year, so you might have to redeploy it. I honestly haven't tested that one. Say what?
You can't change that, is that right?
The 1 year thing on it, no. But I think there are some certificate authorities that you could do like a 2, 3, 5 year. I think Apple signs stuff for 5 years, right?
Second question, if that's okay. When you download it from the, you configure it, you download it, you named it A. Mm-hmm. You want to change the name to B before you upload.
That's fine.
Would you change that after you sign it, or
change it before you sign it?
Before you sign it.
Yeah.
You just change the file name.
Yep.
You don't temper anything in the XML.
Yeah, there's nothing in the XML. It's just
Okay.
the name of the file
Cool.
and then sign that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks. Right next door.
So there was a question before about like when we deliver them, it's the most restrictive that it actually is, right? If I wanted to break apart the entire restrictions payload so I can piecemeal it all together, is that acceptable within this format?
Yeah, that'll work.
That'll work?
Yeah, that might be a little bit more trial and error because I don't know if that one is broken down as nicely as this one was with individual blocks of code. So you might have to dig more into each individual block and go through the settings. But yeah, absolutely, the restrictions works with this workflow.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Way in the back. This is great. You guys should come to my classes sometime. Nobody ever asks me questions in class. This is awesome.
Okay, so going back to supersedence with conflicting settings, just using this as an example, the one we did for File Vault here, if you were to deploy that profile and you also had the the built-in security profile deployed, how would those two interact with each other? And just to clarify, without having said anything File Vault related in the built-in profile.
So general, firewall, and privacy should go ahead and work fine. The only conflict that I could see there would be with File Vault, and this is going to be an assumption, so you know what happens when you assume, but my guess would be that since the modified profile is explicitly turning File Vault on, and the other one default is off, I'm guessing it would turn it on since we had to actually make that choice. But that'd be a good one to test. I'm sorry I don't have that firm answer for you.
And that is all the time we have. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very, very much. Have a good rest of your conference.